sitting at a conference, and a man came across the room, introduced himself, and said, "You're Alan Meltzer." And I said, "Yes." He said, "I worked in the state bank. We weren't allowed to read ordinary newspapers, but we could read economic journals, and I had read about you, and Carl Winter, and Milton Friedman." That was my first meeting with Václav Klaus. I'm honored to introduce him to you as our Russian speaker. He is a man of many accomplishments in many different careers. He not only survived that vicious communist years as an economist at the state bank in what is now the Czech Republic, but as finance minister in the immediate aftermath, he introduced a set of policies that brought the country to a current per capita income of more than $27,000. That's much higher than Poland, Greece, and it's close to Spain and Italy, each about $30,000. This was a great success, especially a great success after all the wasted years. After this success, he became Prime Minister, and for the most recently 10 years, President of the Czech Republic. 2 years ago, we all remember that President Klaus hosted a splendid meeting of our society in beautiful Prague. We got to see much of the inside of Prague Castle. President Klaus now teaches economics at the university. I'm sure there's a rather large amount of healthy skepticism about European centralization and global climate change in those classes. Today we will hear some serious skepticism about current efforts to centralize power in the European Union, and I add, in the United States. His title is Careless Opening Up of Countries Without Keeping the Anchor of the Nation State. Leads either to anarchy or to global governance. Lessons of the European experience. Today he will talk to us about one of the more serious threats to freedom. I think you will enjoy hearing the skepticism that he has about some of the developments in Europe that have repercussions for the rest of us. It's a pleasure to welcome Václav Klaus.
Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, we permanently speak about skepticism. I don't know whether it's the correct description of the situation, and I like very much Kevin's statement 1 hour ago. Frustration, yes, but discouragement, no. And this is, in my understanding, the correct approach to our current world. So thank you very much for the invitation and for giving me this chance to speak. 24 years ago, a few months after the fall of communism, I attended my first MPS general meeting. As some of you may remember, it was held in Munich, Germany. It gave me the enormously valuable opportunity to see and meet the famous names of our society, Friedman, Stigler, Becker, and many others. Unfortunately, they are not among us. The last one of this trio, Gary Becker, who helped preparing this meeting, died a few months ago. We all miss him very much, and I'm sure we all enjoyed the previous session about him. And we all miss him, but not only that. I hope we feel the enormous responsibility to continue fighting for freedom, democracy, and classical liberal ideas, to keep the legacy of the founding fathers of our society alive. I remember the atmosphere of victory which prevailed at the first MPS meeting after the fall of communism. We were perhaps unduly optimistic at that time. There were some among us who already then considered this victory relative and temporary, but the reversal came faster than we expected. Why is it so? When I stay in the field of ideas, and this is our arena, there is no doubt that we are being more and more encircled by the opponents of our ideas. The external attack is based on the success of propaganda of something else than individual freedom and liberty by many currently so popular new isms, which are connected with all kinds of old collectivistic notions and approaches. This is, however, only half of the problem. Our additional problem, not less worrisome than the external threats, is our limited capability to be convincing. Is there a problem with us? Are we holding the torch of liberty firmly and tightly enough? Are we presenting our views with the same strong voice and with the same deepness of arguments as it was done by our predecessors and colleagues in the past? I am not sure. We are, hopefully, as strong as before in our beliefs, in our ideology, in our dislike of communism, totalitarianism, collectivism, statism, and other similar isms. But are we able to defend, promote, and explain our ideas as the older generation of our members was? I always remember Pep Fellner's presidential address held several years ago, when he stressed that ideas are not self-implementing, if I remember correctly. And not only that, are our ideas already closed and completed and require just to be repeated? The main problem, as I see it, is that we are not able to innovatively use our principal ideas in the current debates and disputes with the holders of opposite views. I am afraid we are just passively repeating our old canonical view, truths, instead of coming up with new convincing arguments. Why is it so? Do we have enough original thinkers among us now, as in the past? Do they not exist, or are they not interested in joining our society? Is not our current membership base composed mainly out of administrators of various think tanks? And as one of them, I will always appreciate their irreplaceable role, rather than of original thinkers. And if so, is it tenable? Almost quarter of a century ago, when I attended our meeting for the first time, I hardly dared to breathe. I didn't dare opening my mouth in front of our founding fathers, Nobel Prize winners, distinguished thinkers and authors. Do the current newcomers to our society have similar respect to today's MPS members? And not just that, do we deserve such a respect? Does the MPS remain a source of ideas? Is the MPS considered to be the cornerstone of classical liberal ideas in today's world. At our meetings, I do miss open and friendly, but serious debates about that. We listen to presentations that are sometimes excellent, sometimes mediocre, sometimes not so good, but they could be also given at other places to other audiences as a method to weaken the role of the state in society. I would add, of their own state, which they understandably dislike very much. This is one of the traditional MPS positions. But by attacking the nation state, we eventually help to weaken our own nation state, but not the state as such. As a result of it, we are getting a much more distant, much more untouchable, and much more undemocratic state or state-like administrative authorities. This is not an improvement. I am very much in favor of our own domestic democratic decisions, however imperfect, if not sometimes totally wrong they might be, as opposed to the arbitrary decisions of the international nomenclatura. In a democracy, we don't need any undemocratically selected elites who have a power to mastermind our lives and to tell us what is good for us. Our main question should therefore be whether the decisions are made by means of democratic institutions or not. We are not winning this era, and this is skepticism. But I think it's a realistic description of the situation. We are not winning this era. The winners are all kinds of vested interests, lobbyists, rent seekers, international bureaucrats, who all try to escape the nation state. They all are eager to live in a world of supranational institutions devoid of democratic control. They want to escape politics because it places much needed constraints on their activities. They prefer to live in a post-political paradise. Members of the MPS have different aims and ambitions. We want politics, even if we criticize it very much, but we want politics because without it, democracy can't exist. We want the nation state, not just an empty shell of a neutral, central human agency, or how to call it. To a great regret of some of us, the unresisted rise of global governance is here and is here to stay. We have become witnesses of a quiet, creeping, almost invisible revolution towards a post-democratic global, in the case of Europe, European governance. Some of us are true believers in the economic way of thinking, like the statement during the last session, economics taken seriously, if you remember. It motivates us to raise the obvious economic question. Is the growth of global governance demand-driven or supply-driven? My experience tells me that the ordinary people do not ask for it, do not demand it. The motivations on the supply side are much stronger. Some people keep advocating and promoting the shifting of political power away from elected politicians towards the international nomenclatura of civil servants and towards Dutch judges, because they are convinced that the rent seeking, as we see it in Brussels, is easier there. They do have interests. Some other people, adherents of cosmopolitanism and Europeism, want to create something superior to politics, something superior to democracy. They want to create a world where there are no subjects, where there are subjects but no citizens, where the dominant force are the anointed. Their ambitions are based on ideas, not on our ideas. For all true cosmopolitans and Europeists, the notion of citizenship is superfluous and wrong. They want a universal personhood. The growth of cosmopolitanism and global governance is also connected with the growing, undoubtedly in many respects positive and desirable, openness of individual countries. As someone who spent almost half a century of his life in a closed or semi-closed communist country, I probably don't need to demonstrate here now how much I enjoy living in our currently, still to some respect, free and open society. But I want to raise a different question. Is this openness a blessing only? Doesn't it have its other side as well? I know it is almost an unpermitted and forbidden question here. The MPS has traditionally advocated freedom and unlimited openness for many good reasons, which I fully share. In the world where oppressive states played such a role, it was an undisputable and unquestionable political and ideological stance. Is it the same now? Isn't the current danger hidden elsewhere? Isn't it connected with global governance? Some people would correctly argue that openness of individual countries is something else than the shift towards global governance. It undoubtedly is. But I'm afraid there is a very strong connection between these two phenomena in a case when the openness, opening up, is connected with the weakening, if not evaporation, of nation states, as it is happening in the current world, especially in Europe. The nation state has been attacked as a sanctuary of nationalism and a fertile land for wars and hatred among nations. This is something I can't accept. I know that the idea of a nation state has become a politically incorrect concept, especially in Europe. But the sovereign nation state is a modern institution. It is not a historical anachronism. The current attacks on it offer a very trivialized and conceptually wrong interpretation of the substance of nation state, which has nevertheless been accepted as a conventional wisdom. And as a conventional wisdom, it has its consequences. It directly leads to the advocacy of global governance, because everyone is afraid of an unorganized state of affairs, of anarchy. I think we have to look at it differently. The nation state has an undeniable meaning and role as a guarantor of democracy. Without a strong nation state, there can't be democracy. I know that I am not saying anything new. What I wanted to achieve with this speech was to point out some of the not always mentioned connected connections and consequences. We all know that the law of unintended consequences is always here. The majority of MPS members, not here now, used to come from the West. They used to believe that the internationalization and globalization tendencies of recent years help to dissipate Western values of liberty, human dignity, civil rights, individualism, etc., all over the world. But we live in a different era now. We have already entered the post-West world order. The age of the West has ended. Paradoxically, what we see is not the victory of Eastern or Southern or whatever values, but the victory of the Western multiculturalist crusade against Western and European culture and civilization. To sum up, to protect liberty, and this is or should be our main interest, we need to rehabilitate the sovereign nation state. We also have to clarify the fundamental difference between defending the nation state and celebrating patriotism. We have to concentrate on the political context of the nation state as opposed to its narrowing to the concept of cultural identity. We need to re-establish real citizenship, not a universal personhood. We need responsible citizens anchored in domestic realities, not cosmopolitan, selfish individuals floating at the surface and searching for short-term pleasures and advantages without roots and responsibility. So this is my today's message. Thank you very much for the
Thank you very much for that wonderful talk. President Klaus has agreed to answer a few questions. I'll let him handle those.
Would you apply the same logic about the nation state passing on power to supranational organizations? Would you apply the same logic about the nation state passing on power to supranational organizations also to the power transfer that happens within nation states, i.e. regionalism, federalism, local government? Isn't there a chance to revive the principle of subsidiarity?
I don't understand the principle of subsidiarity. This is just the EU empty slogan. And the European have been defending subsidiarity as the main principle in the year 1958, 68, 78, 88, 98. Now, always it was perfectly according to the principle of subsidiarity. Nevertheless, the centralization in the EU have been growing dramatically. So this is, I understand your point. So this is my just side remark to the term subsidiarity, which I don't accept. It reminds me of the communist slogan of the centralistic. Of democratic centralism, which was the main slogan in the communist era, and I think that subsidiarity is identical with the Soviet democratic centralism. So this is not a help to speak about subsidiarity. Definitely there are public goods, let's say at the local level, at the municipal level, at some regional level, at the state level, hopefully something above it. But I think that for political democracy, you can't return to the Athens cities democracy, and you can't have empires. So you need the nation state is just the right place for political democracy.
Please.
I'd like to question, because you invited to open discussion, There's another side we are seeing in Europe right now. And as nationalism is coming onto the stage, it's not pretty, and it's distinctly against liberalism. Viktor Orban in July gave his speech in Romania, which was very significant, not in Hungary. He gave it in the neighboring country. He said, we are building an illiberal state on our national principle. We're seeing another neighboring country invaded, military occupation and war because of nationalism being set loose. So we heard a discussion of the dangers of centralization. We know this. You will not find people defending standard European egg-timers. But what about the danger you did not mention of war? That is why we liberals are frightened of the idea of resurrecting nation-state, because we see it happening right now from Mr. Putin, Mr. Orban making motions about Romania. That is terrifying.
Well, I don't agree with this interpretation. To easily compare Mr. Orban and Mr. Putin, and Mr. Orban is not my best friend. Nevertheless, he's a normal European politician who was elected in free democratic elections, and he has many conflicting statements, and one of them is the recent speech in Romania. I wouldn't dramatize it so much. You implicitly mentioned Ukraine. I disagree with a simplified notion in the Western media saying that there are good guys in Ukraine and the bad guys in Russia. It's much more complicated issue, and I don't think there is one-sided aggression coming from Russia to Ukraine. So, but that would be a good topic for the afternoon session to discuss it seriously and in length. War. I simply disagree with the standard interpretation of the Second World War that it was because of nationalism. No, it was because of Nazism and because of communism, because of those collectivistic ideologies, not because of nationalism. And that would be my answer to the question.
Kevin? In reference to the earlier questions about federalism and the like, I mean, isn't in a lot of ways what you're saying about the global governance really just, what makes that unstable is the usual incentive for people to collude who are supposed to compete. And global governance is really like a way to collude to do things you wouldn't be able to get away with on your own. People might actually resist you. That if the global governance, in other words, the idea of federalism is everybody has their own, people can move and it's competition among areas. Global governance is then like collusion, that we're going to put in rules that people would want to get out from under if they could, but if it's so broad that they can't move, then you have the usual failure that, you know, if people are colluding, you don't get competition. And why isn't that really part of what you're saying is wrong with the global governance? Is it really constitutes a form of collusion among people who ought to be competing?
Well, that would be a different topic, a different lecture, and different speech. You know, that definitely what I feel very strongly is, especially in Europe, but more and more in the whole world, are the activities and the intrusiveness of rulers somewhere very far from your own country. In Europe these days, most of the decisions are made in Brussels. And I lived for decades being ruled by Moscow, and I don't need to live again for the rest of my life in an empire where it is ruled from Brussels. So definitely we wanted to be a free, sovereign, independent country. So that's the real issue. And I always repeat that it's very difficult to measure the degree of dependence of individual member countries in the EU dependence on the decisions in Brussels. But recently I read a serious study made by the German Ministry of Justice saying that 85% of legislation comes in the form of a directive from Brussels, and the individual countries are just forced to make out of this directive the real bill. 85%. This is more than, I suppose, in the United States of America. I don't know what's the role of Arkansas and Massachusetts and California in this respect. So this is simply what we don't want, and for me the fight is between having sovereignty and independence and being ruled from a distant city and distant place. What you say is a different dimension of the whole issue.
Further question?
I'll speak out loud because I don't have a microphone, but never mind. I, of course, totally agree with what you said, but
Wait 1 second, you will have a
now I'm empowered. Total agreement with the dangers to freedom that you elaborated, but the nation state has a sister problem, a twin, and that is indiscriminate international migration. Now that is probably not allowed to be discussed in MPS, but we have to realize that our prosperity, our freedom, rests on shared institutions, on valuable institutional capital. Now, some immigration helps to enrich that evolutionary capacity to enhance it, but there are limits to what society can absorb. And if we get open-ended immigration, as seems to be the aspiration of certain of these international bureaucrats, and reality with illegal immigration, we will lose that institutional capital and probably lose a lot of our freedom. Shouldn't MPS start to discuss that problem as well?
Thank you very much. Wolfgang, I enjoy very much that you said that you agree with my position. I must say that I always agree with your writings, which I read with pleasure, and I learned a lot from your writings. The immigration is a real issue. This is connected with the topic, the title of my speech is the openness, the opening up, the naive, careless, unprepared, without something is a big problem which I feel and we feel. And I must say that as someone who lived till my almost 50 years of my age in a closed communist society, so for us the opening up and the ability to travel abroad was a tremendous achievement. We discussed it yesterday with Alan during the dinner, and I'm afraid that the people from the US are not able even to appreciate the impossibility to travel abroad and what it means for us. They take it for granted that they can travel all over the world. So as someone who spent almost 50 years of my life in such a society, I was afraid of the careless, naive opening up. And surprisingly, I was, when there was the elimination of the borders in Europe, I was the only one who hesitated whether this is only a victory. And I was saying to some people who were surprised, I said, well, I used to live for half a century in a country without borders, because we didn't have borders, we had the Iron Curtain. And Iron Curtain was something else than borders. I'm sure you understand what I mean. So my point was, I would be happy to live for some decades in a world with normal borders. Borders are absolutely necessary for human society, for every one of us. Everyone has doors in his house and probably closes it when he leaves the house. The same is true about countries. So I hesitate very much to be just a fanatical supporter of naive opening up of countries with all those repercussions and connections.
I have a microphone. Does that permit me to ask a question?
One more question, way back.
I was given the microphone for the previous question. May I ask the question? Many of us were astonished by the speed with which the Soviet system collapsed. In retrospect, we say, well, yes, it was dysfunctional, it was highly centralized, it was slow, it was bureaucratic. Now, Brussels is highly centralized, it's slow, it's bureaucratic. Why should we presume that it's highly durable? Why should we not consider that it might be surprisingly fragile, and that what you witnessed in 1989 could be instructive? Vladimir Bukovsky said he went into the Soviet archives and construed that the model of the EU system was complementary to the Soviet model.
First, speaking about the end of communism, I always stress that communism was not defeated. Communism sort of melted down. So the communism collapsed from inside. That's the first point. Second point, communism lasted much longer than the current European Union. So don't be so fascinated with the fact that the EU still exists. I remember in our countries, permanently we were asking, how long could it last? It can't last so long, and so on. Nevertheless, this lasted. I'm sure the same is the problem of the European Union. I don't know what to say. I remember 2009, Angela Merkel came to me, to my office, and we discussed things, and she, after the meeting, she asked, do you plan to enter the Eurozone, to accept the euro as a currency in the year 2015? And it was before the euro crisis. When I got that question, and I said, Angela, do you really think that the euro will still exist in the year 2015? She was absolutely shocked. Then came the crisis, not before that. So I don't know. I think that the European Union is fragile, but nevertheless, there are still some possibilities. European Union is still rich enough to finance all misconceptions.
I think this fascinating discussion could go on for a long time. We thank you for all the questions and issues that you've raised in our minds. It was a really yeoman performance that we expect from you. Thank you very much.